the year 2020, and this will be released concurrently throughout the whole world at the same time. And as we are going to present the results to you, as today we have a large number of participants, close to 200 participants. At the end of the presentation, there will be a Q&A sessions through the chat box. And so I look forward to interact with you through the chat box. So without further ado, let me show you give you the presentation and take you through the results for 2020. Give you the presentation and take you through the results for 2020. Okay, the Corruption Perception Index, or we call it in short CPI, is prepared every year, and it is done using secondary data. So some of you might be familiar, and so this is how it is. So the Corruption Perception Index, it covers the whole world, and the last year where the methodology was changed was in 2012. So when you make year-to-year comparison, you should be doing it from the year 2012 to 2020. And for this year's Corruption Perception Index, we have 180 countries participating. Now, so 180 countries participating and using secondary sources of 13 different data sources, capturing perceptions from experts, business people, and also expatriates who are in the country. And it is about abuse of power for private gain. And who are the respondents are mainly experts and business people, as I said earlier, and this is assessment of the public sector. So this is assessment of public sector corruption by public officials. Now, what does it measure? It measures bribery, embezzlement of funds, using private office for private gain, public office for private gain, access for civil society for information. So like civil societies, how well they can get information from the government, state capture, the government's ability to enforce integrity mechanisms, effective prosecution of corrupt officials, red tape and excessive bureaucratic burdens, adequate laws on financial disclosure, legal protection for whistleblowers, and so on. Now, what does the CPI does not measure is about citizens' perception on experience on corruption, tax fraud, illicit financial flows, enablers of corruption, money laundering, and any type of private sector corruption, and in informal economies and markets. So like in the case like citizens' perception, that is another type of survey which we call Global Corruption Barometer. That was released in November last year. So here in CPI, it's only from the business community, from the experts, country managers or expatriates, and so on. Now, what are the sources of this survey that we get? There are 13 sources. And of course, not every countries you will have 13 sources. Some countries will have 10, some may have 8, some may have 9. So these are the 13 sources that we have. Now, I would like you to particularly pay attention to source number 9, for example, varieties of democracy. This source is particularly concerned about the democracy the practice of parliamentary democracy in a country and so on. So they can make a big difference when there is a deterioration of democracy in a particular country. Now, in terms of the methodology, what are the steps? The first step is to select the data sources. Then we rescale the data sources. The reason for that is out of these 13 sources that we get information about level of corruption in a particular country, the scales are different. So some of them may be on a Likert scale of 1 to 10, some could be 1 to 5, some could be 1 to 7. So if you just pick up the raw data and put them together, you will not be making a fair comparison. So we have to do a rescaling. And then an average is calculated, and then an uncertainty is all reported. So as I said earlier, in the methodology, we do a rescaling. And so finally, when it is rescaled, the score will be from 0 to 100, 0 being very poor, and a high number of 100 is very clean. Now, how is calculated? Out of the 13 sources, assuming that your country has 13 sources or 10 sources, so once the rescaling is done from 0 to 100, then the score is averaged. We do a simple averaging. And of course, each of these final results that we get, there is a confidence interval. Typically, it is about 90% confidence limit, and the standard error is determined. So it could be whatever percentage, country by country. They have gone through it and they have given their comments before they are released. Now, what makes a valid source is based on the reputable organization that actually do these surveys. The World Bank is involved, a variety of democracies is involved, Freedom House, The Economist, Intelligence Unit, World Justice Project, World Economic Forum, and so on. Now, why do we still need the CPI? Now, this is the comments from the external audit. The coverage, the CPI covers more countries than any of the individual sources alone. In terms of statistical reliability, the CPI is better than the sum of its parts as it compensates eventual errors among sources by taking the average of at least 3 different sources and as many as 13. So, as I mentioned earlier, 13 sources we use, but some countries may have less than that. And the criteria to qualify into the CPI is minimum we need 3 different sources. So if your country is being surveyed by less than 3 sources, then your country will not be listed in the CPI. In terms of precision, the scale is 0 to 100, introduces more precision in comparison to other sources that have scales of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 and so on. In terms of neutrality, the CPI reconciles different viewpoints on the issue of public sector corruption and is also neutral when handling different political regimes. So let's now get into the results of the 2020, which all of us are waiting for. And the first result that I will be showing you is the top 10 countries in the world. Now, before that, there is some global highlights that I just want to show you in the findings that have been released, particularly for this year, global highlights. The CPI reveals some very disturbing news throughout the world. The Corruption Perception Index reveals that most countries have made very limited progress in tackling corruption. 2/3 of the countries scored below 50 points or 50 marks out of 100. So 2/3 of the countries in the world, out of the 180 countries, have scored below 50 marks. Now, the pandemic COVID-19 is not just a health and economic crisis, but a corruption crisis too. Many countries, due to the pandemic and the economic crisis, they have come out with various stimulus packages. And many of these stimulus packages don't go through proper check and balance Some, they have bypassed the parliamentary check and balance, and that has opened the door for corruption. Similarly, countries with higher level of corruption are worse perpetrators of rule of law and democratic breaches while managing the COVID-19 crisis. So this is a general highlight that we have seen in the report for 2020. Now, in a nutshell, 180 countries, 100 being the countries is a color code being 100, and yellow is very clean. And as the scores go down, it turns to red and a dark red. So as I said earlier, 2/3 of the countries have scored below 50 points, and the average score throughout the world is only 43, which is not good because it's all below 50%. Now, in terms of the top 10 countries, Denmark, similar to 2019, has come out number 1, is a top country in the world in terms of the CPI index, followed by New Zealand. Both of them actually score first place because they are same points. And then we have followed by Finland, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg. So these are the top 10 countries who have done very well. The only country from Asia who actually have come into the top 10 is Singapore. Singapore has done well in the last few years, especially in fighting corruption. And this is due to the systems they have put in place many years back. So we are very proud at least one Asian country is in the top 10. Now, in terms of the bottom 10 countries, as you can see, it starts from Haiti and to the end is South Sudan. Some of them score as low as 12 points to 18 points. And these countries, if you look at the list, basically there is no rule of law in these countries. The democratic system is all destroyed. And that is one of the reasons that these countries don't do well. In fact, year after year, their names will pop up in the bottom 180. Now, in terms of country zone that has done very well, the Western European countries and European Union, they have done very well, and their average score is 66. And as you can see from the earlier list, Scandinavian countries have done very, very well throughout the last few years. And sub-Saharan countries, Africa, they have done very poorly. So they are the lowest at 32. Now, the next slide that I want to show you, this is the first time this data has been shown. And the source of this data is the World Bank's World Development Indicators. It is related to the health spending. And this was actually shown mainly because it's related to the world pandemic. World is suffering from the pandemic COVID-19. Now, in the y-axis here, you see that the health spending, plotted health spending to the ratio of GDP. So from every country's the health spending, the budget for health versus divided by the GDP. So it's as a ratio is plotted on the y-axis. And in the x-axis, we have broken it into 3 groups of the CPI results in terms of score. So you have a range of 66 to 180, 66 to 100 points. In the middle is 34 to 66, and the lowest is from 0 to 33. Now, what is actually here, these dots here, it means that countries who are scoring in their CPI scores, and here they have taken an average. This number is actually the ratio of health spending to GDP. Now, if you look at a trend here, you will notice that countries which spend more on healthcare, they tend to do well in the CPI as well. All right, so this is an aggregate data, and you may ask where does our country, Malaysia, stands? we have not done any separate analysis for Malaysia, but however, we did some homework recently to see what is the ratio between health spending in Malaysia to GDP. We are around 4%, 4.1 to 4.2%. And based on 2019's CPI score, we did score at 53 points. So we are somewhere here. So from this chart, it appears that we need to spend more on healthcare, and that is possibly one reason. And don't say that this is the only factor that can improve the CPI, but this could be one of the factor that can help to push up the CPI. Now, the second findings in the global report is about countries that perform well on the CPI are less likely to violate democratic practices. So this is a source of this is from the Pandemic Violations Democratic Standards Index by the Varieties of Democracy in 2020. So you can see from here, countries who score well, they have very little violations or no violations at all. Minor ones score like that, and so on. So this is just to give you an indication from some of the global highlights. Now, this will be the results that you are waiting for to know where Malaysia stands in the year 2020. Now, before that, let me bring you back to 2019. What happened in 2019? How did we score in 2019? In 2019, our score was 53 points, and we were ranked 51 in the world out of the 180 countries. And if you remember, in 2019, this was a big improvement because our rank was 61 in 2018, and we jumped up 10 steps in 2019. We did very well. Our points went up from 47 to 53 last year. In 2019. So where do we stand in 2020? This is what we are waiting for. So in 2020, the results are as follows. So our score for 2020, Corruption Perception Index, is 51, and our rank is 57. This means our score has gone down by 2 points, and our rank has dropped by 6 steps. So if you recall just now, I said that we used to be 53 points in 2019, our rank was 51, and now we have dropped to 51 and 57. Now we need to do analysis. Why did we deteriorate? Now, these are how the from the secondary data, the sources have revealed the score for Malaysia, and we have 9 different sources. Remember, just now I mentioned total there'll be 13 different sources, but each country could vary from 8 to 10 or maybe less than that. But anything less than 3 will not qualify for the CPI. So in Malaysia's case, we have 9 different surveys. This is how we have scored. And let's compare with 2019. And this is how we have fared. So you can see that in 2020, our overall score have gone down. And as I've mentioned during the earlier explanation, that we base on a simple average. And based on a simpler average, our score is 51. And you can see very clearly, remember I mentioned, keep an eye on this particular source, Varieties of Democracy, and they have actually scored low for us. Another one that has scored low for us is Political and Economic Risk Consultancy Asian Intelligence. Now, let's make an analysis of countries in ASEAN. And as I mentioned that earlier, Singapore is the top performer within ASEAN. Within ASEAN, they always have taken the first spot, followed by Brunei with 60 points. Their rank is 35. and followed by Malaysia. So Malaysia within ASEAN is in number 3 position. Now this has been constant over in terms of rank, has been constant within ASEAN countries for the last few years. The other countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and the rest of ASEAN, they are much lower than Malaysia. So this is something that within ASEAN we've got to improve and at least to reach to the level of Brunei, because between Malaysia and Brunei, we are different by only about 9 points. So let's analyze among Islamic countries. This is an analysis of the CPI among Islamic countries in terms of score and rank. The UAE is the top performer with 71 points, and they rank 21 out of the 180 countries, followed by Qatar, then Brunei, then Oman, then Saudi Arabia, and followed by Malaysia and the rest. Now, we make this analysis, and it is a very important analysis among Islamic countries. First, because we are a Muslim majority country. More than 60% in this population in this country are Muslims. And from an Islamic perspective, when you talk about bribery and corruption, this is strictly forbidden. Therefore, it is very important for Malaysia to give attention to this. And in fact, our target should be to be the best among the Islamic countries. It's not impossible. We can do it if we have the will, and if everybody put their effort together. I'm very sure we can reach one day to be the number 1 among Islamic countries in terms of fighting corruption and being a clean country. Now, overall, I give you a summary of all the countries, and as you can see, the summary as I'm showing you here. Denmark, New Zealand, Finland, Singapore, they are in the top rank, and of course UAE is here, United Emirates, and Malaysia is here at the spot of 51, and at the rank of 57, and our score is 51 for the year 2020. So we still have a lot of work to do, and although we may have dropped by 2 points, which is statistically insignificant, but we need to still worry about this drop of 2 points, and our rank has dropped, and we got to improve. I'm sure we can be better than countries like Rwanda and Poland and so on. So this is a summary of the chart of trend showing you from 2012 to 2020. Now, as I mentioned to you, of course, there were CPI results before 2012, but we are not showing this to you because the methodology changed in 2012. So it won't be an apple-to-apple comparison if we bring before 2012. Now, you will see in 2012, when our score was 49, and subsequent years it went up. Now, many of you will recall at that time we still had Pemandu, a unit in the government, and they were doing a lot of work together with MACC and so on. There was a lot of effort put in, and that is one of the reasons it improved. Unfortunately, the one MDB issue surfaced around 2014, and that resulted in the deterioration of our results. And you can see it was all the way going down until the year 2018, when we had the GE14, General Election 14. And of course, there was a regime change, if we all recollect that. And the new regime came with the agenda of fighting corruption as the #1 agenda for the nation. And over the 2 years, we saw a dramatic improvement or recovery in our score. And it was, we scored 53 points in the last year, so CPI. And then we had a change of government in the very early 2020. And then we see suddenly in 2020's result, our score has dropped. As I mentioned earlier, the 2 points drop is statistically insignificant because the margin of error for our country is about 1.6%. So statistically, it is insignificant. However, when you see a downtrend, it is something for us to worry and something for us to do something about it. So let's now do some analysis of what has happened. Now, I would like to start with the positive analysis, the reasons for, before we go into the reasons for the deterioration of the score. Let's look at some positive things that has happened over the last 1 year, particularly after the new regime took over. Number one, the National Anti-Corruption Plan 2019 to 2023 that was set up by the previous government was continued by the current government. The current government did not say that they are going to abolish or do away with the National Anti-Corruption Plan. So that is something positive. And because this National Anti-Corruption Plan is a very wide-ranging document to fight corruption at the national level. And there were 115 initiatives. They have clear timelines, responsibilities, and so on. So the government, the Perikatan National Government, committed to say that they want to continue with this. And we also saw that last 1 year, the new government did not interfere in the high-profile cases, especially involving politicians. So it was a hands-off kind of thing, which is good. The other factor is the corporate liability, Section 17, capital A, which was passed. The law was passed during the Barisan Nasional government, and 2 years down the road, the enforcement date was 1st June 2020. So when the PH government took over, they supported it. Perikatan National Government came in, they supported it, and they kept to the word of 1st June enforcement. And here I would like to congratulate people from GICC, from MACC. They put in a lot of effort to convince the PN government that this should continue. So these are some of the positive developments. Now, in terms of other issues, in terms of the reason why possibly the results have actually gone down is institutional reforms have actually stalled. The failure to table and pass the political funding bill also by the previous government as well as this government, and that has still resulting in money politics is still rampant during elections. We saw this during the recent Sabah elections and also during party elections. This is still going on. The IPCMC bill, which is for the police misconduct, this also was not tabled. It was supposed to be tabled in the last March parliamentary sitting, and that was put on hold. And now we hear that there is a watered down version, what we call IPCC bill. Some of you would have seen this new IPCC bill, and this is an ineffective bill, and a lot of it is toothless. I can't take action. And then the acquittal and discharge not amounting to acquittal of some high-profile personalities. We heard from the media that Riza Aziz, Dato' Musa Aman's case, one of the case of Tengku Adnan, and these are all factors that creates a negative pressure. Limited access to information on matters of public interest. Should not hide under the non-disclosure clause in agreement unless it directly impacts national security. So I give you two examples. One is the high-speed railway project that was terminated, but what is the compensation to Singapore is not disclosed. When civil society raised this issue, the government's explanation was there is a non-disclosure clause in the agreement. We fully understand this, we recognize this, but the compensation is all about taxpayers' money. and taxpayers have a right to know what is actually going to be compensated. So in cases like these, we urge the government to get exception for this with the other party to make disclosures. Similarly, the Goldman Sachs case on 1MDB, when they agreed to a compensation, the same explanation was given, non-disclosure clause. I think the public has a right to know. The world knows about 1MDB case, and Goldman Sachs has represented all over the world. And I think it is only appropriate that what compensation has been paid to the government is disclosed. Continued abuse of power and corruption by enforcement agencies. I'll give you an example. Despite MACC's crackdown on petty corruption in the Immigration Department, bribe taking and fraudulent issuance of visas remain a perennial problem. There is still lack of political will from various administrations in fighting institutional corruption. Next, appointment of politicians without experience to head GLCs and GLICs. Now, as a civil society, Transparency International has made it clear that we are never in favor of politicians heading GLCs and GLICs simply because they will raise an issue of conflict of interest. And recently, we also saw a case where payments to contractors were put on hold despite work being done. So this is the danger of having politicians without experience to head GLCs and GLICs. Limited progress and public update on high-profile cases. Human trafficking on Wang Kalyan case. If many of you will remember, many of these refugees who came into this country or illegal immigrants who came to this country, they were murdered, their graves were found, and there was a Royal Commission and inquiry done, but until today we haven't got the report or been disclosed to the public. The Sabah Watergate scandal, there were big show on this years ago, but we do not know what is the outcome of this case. The Littoral Combat Ship case, where you have heard that 9 billion was spent, but not a single ship has been completed and delivered. I understand that the Anti-Corruption Agency, MACC, is doing some investigation on this. We hope that updates of this case will be revealed to the public. At least give the public an update what has happened to this case. Why I'm mentioning this? Because the CPI is not only measuring bribery, corruption, democracy, freedom of information, but also transparency. See, when we disclose this to the public, the perception will improve. So these are ways how we can improve our score for the country. Recently, the corruption within the system appears to be very embedded in the system. The non-halal meat scandal reported to have operated with impunity for 40 years. How can this be operating without corruption and bribery happening within the system? Government procurement bill, until today, it has not been tabled in Parliament. There is lack of progress on amendments to the Whistleblower Protection Act 2010. This was initiated by the Prime Minister's Department 2 years ago. They have called civil societies, the enforcement units, various enforcement units, academicians. We had workshops. They wanted feedback. TI had given recommendations to the Prime Minister's Department, but until today, nothing has happened. Continued adverse findings and repeated governance failures observed in the Auditor's General Report, annual report. Now, this, many of you, it's all in the website. Each year you find there is a failure of governance within the public sector and repeated, and action has not been taken. So lack of action against public officials who have been found to be abusing their positions, nothing has happened to them. Limited update on the progress of National Anti-Corruption Plan of the 115 initiatives. More than a year ago, we used to get updates periodically that 20 initiatives have been completed, or 22 have been completed, or 25 have been completed. The last 1 year, we have not been getting updates. Next, for improved transparency, these are some of the recommendations. What the government should do is to narrow the scope of the Official Secrets Act so that matters of public interest, especially like directly negotiated contracts, can be released and only matters of national security are protected. Remember just now I mentioned about the high-speed railway, the compensation to Singapore. These are things that the public should be given information. This is not national security. So those are things that I think the government can do to improve transparency within the system. Provide regular updates on the status of impending high-profile cases. Like I talked about the Wang Kalian case, the Sabah Watergate scandal, or the littoral combat ship case. So these kind of updates, these are things that the public is looking for. And there will be greater transparency from the side of the government. Monitoring and implementation of National Anti-Corruption Plan, and disclose progress on the 115 initiatives via public dashboard.
Nanti kalau beras mati itu satu kawan yang mama tunjuk tu setengah dia itu berlebih dan tak sedap. Itu dah tak sedap.
For whistleblowers. Enactment of asset declaration law to compel all politicians and high-ranking public officials to declare their assets and make it accessible to the public. Reduce large off-budget projects that use public funds. Ensure they have publicly disclosed cost-benefit reports that require parliamentary approval before starting. Reduce the number of projects that use public funds. Ensure they have publicly disclosed cost-benefit reports that require parliamentary approval before starting. Reduce the number of projects that use public funds. Ensure they have publicly disclosed cost-benefit reports amend Election Offences Act in 1954 to include sanctions against corruption, compel public officials found guilty of corruption to vacate their official positions even while they exhaust their appeal process. Now here, I mean, what I'm trying to say is those who have already been convicted and pending appeal of their cases to the appeals court or to the federal court, they should vacate their official positions and not roam freely as what is happening in our country today. Last but not least, enact a new law on ombudsman to investigate complaints of public interest. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I end, I take the questions from you through the chat box, I would like to sum up to tell that the score that we have seen for Malaysia, 2 points have dropped, may be statistically insignificant. However, the trend that we are taking, the trajectory that we are taking is worrying. And the only way to rebound and to move forward is to do institutional reforms. Now, the stage has been set very well. And just to show you again, this is the National Anti-Corruption Plan from 2019 to 2023 that has been set up. And of course, there can be a midterm review. The government can always review the National Anti-Corruption Plan, and where it is possible, we improve and so on. This is a very well crafted document. It gives clear timelines, what are the initiatives to be done, and what needs to be done. What we need to do is to follow this National Anti-Corruption Plan strictly. And as we have recommended that the Chief Secretary to the government, he takes custody of this. We have to understand, it may have been initiated by GICC, but they are not the implementers. They actually coordinate, they compile the results, and that's how it is. So I hope that we give full support. And before I end this presentation, I would like to just quote, because this plan was launched during the Yang Amat Berhormat Tun Dr. Mahathir's time, our former Prime Minister. And one of the things he said was, Malaysia needs to be known for its integrity and not for its corruption. And that is something, even though he may not be in the administration today, but that is, leaders can come and go. But the plan that we have set must be pushed through. So this can only be done if all of us put our efforts together, we as civil society, the authorities, MACC, GICC, and also the public, general public. We all have a role to play. You can't push this problem to only the enforcement agency like MACC. So it's all our collective responsibility. So ladies and gentlemen, it was very nice to present this to you. Now I would like to take questions from you and through the chat box. Now, there are lots of questions here. I may have to apologize because we may not be able to take all the questions from you. Let's see, let me see. Okay, these are all some comments. Sorry, my apologies. Voice was very weak and so on. I hear comments like that. Let's see, what is the question? We can't hear you. Okay. These are some comments. Okay, the question here is, TI said that the survey was focused on perception of experts and business people. But in your recommendations, you're stressing transparency to our citizens. As the citizens are not the respondents, how transparency to our citizens and our procurement especially will change the perception index to positive score and rank? Yes, no doubt the CPI is actually a public sector assessment of the corruption in the public sector by experts and business people. But ordinary citizens can actually play a role in a sense that when you find that you have an issue in public sector, especially when you are getting services and so on, you can actually report to MACC. And under the provision of the Whistleblower Protection Act 2010, you will be given protection, provided you go direct to MACC and report and seek for protection. They will give you a protection, of course, depending on the merit of the case. So that is what we meant by, even though the experts are actually assessing, ordinary citizens have a role to play. So that is one question. All right, I think I have a list of other questions that have come up through the email. How do you see Malaysia progressing in its fight against corruption? What are among the progress brought about by measures such as MP Asset Declaration and the enactment of 17A MACC Act? Now, how do we see Malaysia progressing in the CPI? Now, of course, as I just mentioned just now, in 2020, we see a downtrend. Now, even though it's only 2 points, and we must be positive that we can rebound. Definitely we can rebound, but we have to do our homework. As I mentioned to you, my list that I gave you, in fact, not everything is in the list. There will be a lot more. But if you don't go through institutional reforms, if the transparency is not there, then how are we going to get good results? So we can do it. So I'm very hopeful that if the government can give the commitment to make the reforms, and of course the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission is doing its part, doing its best, and I think we can rebound. But we have to do our homework. If we don't do anything, and if you see those issues that I've highlighted as problems, or those factors that actually cause the deterioration of our score, then if you don't do anything, then we only have ourselves to be blamed. Now, the other part of the question is asset declaration, how much progress we have made. Well, not every politician has declared their assets. They have declared their assets. The opposition, today's opposition, when they were ruling before, they had declared, the MPs have declared their assets, but their family members have not declared their assets. You know, so that is a little gap there, which I think the government may want to think through this so that there is greater transparency. And this is the reason why I mentioned just now that there must be a law on this. Then that will compel all politicians. If you recollect, when the current ruling parties, some of the parties who are ruling now, when they were in opposition, did they declare? No, they did not. Their excuse was, we are not the ruling government, and therefore there is no reason for us to declare. You know, so that is the progress that we have seen. Okay, we have a question. This is in Malay. Permasalahan politik berlanjutan, pemilihan UMNO tahun ini, pilihan raya dijangka dalam masa terdekat. Apakah kesan segera TIM kepada kerajaan dalam memulihkan skor ini? Now, the question is, let me translate in English, then I will give the answer in Malay and English. The problem of political turmoil is continuing with the UMNO elections coming up, or the general elections coming up. What would be the recommendations from Transparency International Malaysia to the government to improve our scores? Now, definitely political turmoil doesn't go well for any investors, because people are afraid of what's going to happen. Now, in the political turmoil, when you have a very unstable government, the focus is survival. So the attention given to corruption or what you call institutional reforms will be very minimal, and I can see that. And what we would like to urge the government is to continue to with the reform. And this is the time where bipartisan politics come in. So I will answer this in Malay now. Dari permasalahan politik yang berlanjutan ini, memang situasi di masa ini ialah survival, di mana parti yang berkuasa hari ini atau pemerintah yang berkuasa hari ini bimbang sangat pada situasi mereka, sama ada mereka akan terus memerintah atau tidak, sebab margin yang mereka ada itu sangat rapat atau mungkin 1-2 kerusi. Jadi fokus pada reformasi institusi tidak diberi tekanan sangat. Jadi nasihat yang kita boleh beri pada kerajaan ialah untuk memberi fokus pada reformasi institusi. Dan inilah masa untuk ahli-ahli politik, tak kira dari pembangkang atau pemerintah, bekerjasama. Kita perlu semangat bipartisan. Ini yang tidak wujud di negara kita hari ini, dan kita harap perkara ini boleh berlaku. Okay, the next question is, what do you think about corporate integrity system? Is this effective to fight against corruption, or adequate procedure is more effective than corporate integrity system management? Okay, the CISM has been initiated for a number of years. Now, actually, it is a good model, especially it is very good for the companies, especially the SMEs, the small and medium scale enterprise, if they follow that. The only setback with that is it is not mandatory. Unlike the anti-bribery management system, or some of you are familiar, the ISO 37000, that has a certification process. All right, so so we can see that many people have not adopted to this, and so the question is all the adequate procedures are more effective than CISM? To me, both are good systems that you want to use, so it's up to the companies to choose which is best. The adequate procedures, the guidelines have been issued by the minister, and so they are based on 5 principles, starting from the tone at the top and so on. So it depends on the particular company which options they would like to prefer to take. Because as you know, the corporate liability has already kicked in, Section 17 capital A from June, and therefore companies need to be very careful about this. All right. Next question. In your view, does Malaysia's rank from 51 in 2019 to 57 represent a significant drop over such a short span of time? Is this one of the worst dips in rankings compared to the past year? Okay, as I mentioned, the 2 points drop, statistically, it's not significant. All right, I mean, it can be plus minus 1.6 based on the margin of error. So it is not very significant. The reason the rank has dropped 6 steps is because many other countries have either maintained or have done better than us. So in terms of score, we may be 2 points below from the previous assessment, but in terms of rank, we have dropped a lot. But that is because others have done well. So we can rebound, definitely. There is a very good possibility we can rebound. But such a rebound can only come if we do our part. Reforms have to come in. We have to demonstrate there is transparency, there is greater transparency, there is a greater disclosures of information and so on. All right. So it's not the worst dip. We had worse than this in the previous years. So I believe that we can actually do better than this current ranking. All right. The next question is, what happened to the institutional reform report submitted to the Council of Eminent Persons in 2018? Okay, it's a very good question. Maybe I have not put it in our recommendations. I fully agree with this question that the government should actually disclose the institutional reform report. During the Pakatan Harapan government's ruling, they did not want to disclose the institutional reform report for whatever reasons. As far as the Council of Eminent Persons in 2018, which was formed, they have said that they have given the report to the government then. So I agree with you that for greater transparency, the institutional reform report should be disclosed. And yes, it will definitely contribute to a positive result in our score. That's one of the factors, but there are a lot more else we have to do. Okay, there's another question here. Should education system be improved, embed more elements of integrity and anti-corruption? Absolutely. Now, I'm not sure at what stage is the implementation is. There was a comment a few months ago from the government that from the upper secondary school syllabus, there will be elements of integrity will be included in the syllabus. If I'm not wrong, was in the Bahasa Malaysia paper or something like that. So we need to do this because when you go to the university level, it's a bit too late. So it's good to push this through, and if it starts at the secondary level and then probably upper secondary level, and maybe as we progress, we can move it down to lower secondary level. Because the earlier we get to the school students, the better it is. So it's a value system that we need to inculcate in our children. And this is something very badly we are missing in our education system. So I fully agree with you. Elements of anti-corruption and integrity should be included in the school system. So we hope that the government will proceed with what they have mentioned. All right. So I think I don't have any other questions here. And if there are no other questions, then we would like to end the session today. We want to thank all of you for your time to hear and see the results for yourself, how Malaysia has fared. And once again, Transparency International Malaysia, we like to appeal to the government to look into all these recommendations we have given. And as a civil society, not only us, we have many other civil societies fighting for the same cause, and we are here to help the government. We are not against what you are doing, but our purpose here is to help you in whatever way we can. But as I said, good results will only come if you put efforts to it. If those reforms don't happen, there's no way we are going to get good results. So with this, I would like to thank you and thank all of your time to join these sessions. And once again, thank you very much. And we wish you all the best. And thank you very much. Goodbye.